Some stories begin long before the first person knows they are inside one. They begin in a letter folded with trembling hands, in a debt no one admits aloud, in a child learning not to ask for more bread. Out on the frontier, love was not always a song. Sometimes it was a woman standing in dust with one trunk, a man too tired to be kind, and a table where hunger sat down before anybody else did. Lillian Archer stepped off the westbound train at Marigold Junction, with both hands wrapped around the brass handle of her brown traveling trunk. The Arizona sun struck her face so hard she nearly staggered, and the depot boards creaked beneath her boots as if even the station wished to warn her back east. She had come from Albany with one black dress, 3 cotton blouses, a silver hair comb that had belonged to her mother, and a letter promising marriage to a widowed rancher named Caleb Ashford. What the letter had not promised was the sight waiting beyond the freight platform. 4 boys stood beside a buckboard hitched to a sorrel mare, all of them thin in different ways, all of them staring at her as if she were a storm cloud deciding whether to bring rain or lightning. The oldest had a rifle too large for his shoulder and eyes too old for his face. The second kept rubbing the cuff of his shirt over a cracked lower lip. The third clutched a flour sack with one hand and a slingshot with the other. The youngest, no more than 5, held an empty tin cup against his stomach and watched Lillian's trunk, as though food might be hidden inside. Behind them stood Caleb Ashford. He was tall, sun-browned, and broad through the shoulders, with a hat pulled low and a jaw set like a fence post, driven too deep into hard ground. His shirt was clean but mended at both elbows. His beard had been trimmed by a man without patience. He looked at Lillian once, then at the depot agent, then at the letter in his hand. "You Miss Archer?" he asked. Lillian lifted her chin. "I am," the youngest boy whispered. "Is she bringing breakfast?" The words crossed the platform like a blade. Caleb's face tightened. The oldest boy looked away. Lillian felt every mile from Albany settle into her bones. "Before we go farther, tell me where you're watching from tonight. If this story touches your heart, like it, share it with someone who needs a quiet frontier kind of hope, and subscribe so you won't miss the next one." Caleb cleared his throat. "No one told him to say that, no," Lillian said softly. "Hungry children do not need telling." The boy with the cracked lip dropped his eyes. The child with the cup pressed it harder against his belly. Lillian had imagined many things during the train journey west. She had imagined dust, heat, plain speech, hardship, maybe even disappointment. She had imagined a widower still grieving. She had not imagined hunger standing on a depot platform in the shape of 4 boys. Caleb folded the letter and tucked it into his shirt pocket. "Your train was late. It was stopped 2 hours at Benson. Figured as much." He gestured toward the buckboard. "Ranch is 9 miles out." Lillian looked at the boys again. "Have they eaten?" The oldest spoke before Caleb could. "We had corn mush yesterday, Micah," Caleb said. The boy's mouth shut. Lillian set down her trunk. Its brass corners clicked against the boards. "Mr. Ashford, is there a place nearby where food might be purchased?" Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly, not angry yet, but guarded. "Stores across the road. Prices are high." "I did not ask if prices were fair. I asked if food was available." A faint sound came from the depot agent's window, a stifled laugh, quickly swallowed. Caleb looked at Lillian for a long second, then nodded once. "There's flour, beans, coffee if Mrs. Bell's not in one of her moods." Lillian turned to the boys. "What are your names?" The oldest hesitated. "Micah." The second wiped his mouth again. "Jonas." The third stuck his chin forward. "Eli." The smallest blinked at her. "Tom." Lillian knelt, careful not to drag her hem through the red dust. "Tom, do you still have your cup because you are thirsty, or because it makes your stomach feel less empty?" His eyes flicked to Caleb, then back to her. "Both." Something inside Lillian, something that had been packed tight as a trunk since she left Albany, loosened and hurt. She stood. "Mr. Ashford, please load my trunk. Boys, come with me." Caleb did not move. "Miss Archer." She looked back. "This arrangement between us." He glanced toward the depot agent again. "It might not be what you think." Lillian felt the heat crawl under her collar. She had read the letter 100 times by kerosene light. Practical marriage, respectable household, 4 motherless sons, room and board, security, a lawful name. No lies exactly, but not everything. "I think," she said, "that 4 boys are hungry and I know how to cook. The rest can wait until no child is standing in public with an empty cup." She did not wait for permission. The store smelled of molasses, leather, lamp oil, and old onions. Mrs. Bell, a narrow woman behind the counter with hair pinned so tightly it lifted her brows, gave Lillian one glance, and took in the black traveling dress, the Eastern gloves, the 4 boys, and Caleb following with the trunk, balanced on one shoulder. "Well," Mrs. Bell said, "so she came." Lillian removed her gloves finger by finger. "I need flour, cornmeal, salt pork, dried apples, coffee, eggs, if you have them, and any butter not yet gone sour." Mrs. Bell looked to Caleb. "On account?" "No," Lillian said. She opened the small drawstring purse hidden beneath her cuff and placed 3 coins on the counter. They were part of the little money left after the train fare. Money meant to keep her from complete helplessness. If the marriage turned cold or false, she could feel Caleb's eyes on it. Mrs. Bell counted the coins with a frown. "That will buy some. Not all. Then we begin with what feeds children by morning." "We and morning," Eli muttered. "We're starving now." "Eli," Micah warned. Lillian looked at Eli. The boy's slingshot hand tightened. He expected scolding. Maybe he had decided early that if the world would not feed him, he would bite it first. "You are correct," Lillian said. "Then we begin with what can be eaten before we leave." She bought crackers, a heel of cheese, and 2 apples with bruises cut into their yellow skins. Outside, beneath the awning, she divided the food with the solemn care of a church offering. Tom tried to eat too quickly. Jonas hid his cheese in his sleeve until she saw him. "You might eat yours," she told him. He shook his head. "For later, for Ben, there are 4 of you." Jonas looked at the wagon. "Ben's the dog." Caleb turned his face away, but not before Lillian saw shame go through him like a shadow. "You might save a little for Ben," she said. "But first, you eat half." Jonas obeyed. Not because he trusted her, she thought, but because his hunger was stronger than his caution. The ride to the Ashford Ranch was long and exposed. The land rolled wide and burnt gold beneath a sky too enormous for Lillian's eastern eyes. Mesquite twisted low along the washes. Dust rose from the wagon wheels and settled on her sleeves, her lashes, the edge of the trunk between her feet. The boys sat crowded opposite her, each guarding his own silence. Caleb drove without speaking much. His hands on the reins were strong and cracked at the knuckles. Lillian noticed a scar running from his left thumb toward his wrist, pale against the brown skin. Once, when the wagon struck a rut, his arm came out to steady Tom without looking. The motion was automatic, tenderness worn down to habit. "Your letter said your sister helped with the children," Lillian said. "She did." "Did she marry?" "She died." The words dropped flat. Lillian waited. No more came. "I'm sorry," she said. Caleb clicked his tongue to the mare. Fever took her in February. And the boy's mother. His shoulders changed. Barely. 3 years gone. Tom had fallen asleep with his cup tucked beneath his chin. Micah watched the horizon. Jonas picked crumbs from the seam of his sleeve. Eli aimed his slingshot at fence posts they passed and whispered under his breath. Lillian looked down at her gloved hands. She had come west because her uncle's house had grown smaller after her aunt died, and smaller still after his new wife. Decided Lillian's unmarried presence was a burden. She had been useful until she became inconvenient. Then came the marriage advertisement folded into the church notice, And then came Caleb Ashford's letter, plain and unsentimental. I need a wife in name and household, not a girl with fancies. My sons need order. I can offer a roof, work, and lawful standing. Affection is not promised. At the time, honesty had seemed a kind of kindness. Now, watching Tom sleep through hunger, because his body had surrendered before his will did, Lillian was less sure. The ranch house appeared near sundown, crouched against a rise with 2 cottonwoods standing guard beside a dry creek bed. It had once been whitewashed, but wind and weather had stripped it to gray boards in places. A barn leaned but held. A corral fence sagged on the north side. Hens scratched near the porch. One pane of the front window had been patched with oiled paper that shivered in the evening air. A yellow dog limped out from beneath the porch and wagged his whole body when Jonas climbed down. "Ben," Jonas whispered, and fed him the saved cheese. The kitchen was the first room Lillian entered, and in that first glance she understood the house better than any letter could have explained. The stove was cold. Ash had spilled beneath it and been tracked across the floor. A sack of flour stood open near the table, folded badly and nearly empty. Tin plates were stacked unwashed in a basin. A coffee pot sat on the stove with grounds dried black inside it. The table had 5 chairs and one small crate pulled up where a 6th person might sit if she did not mind feeling temporary. Tom woke and stumbled in behind her. "Can you make breakfast now?" "It is evening," Micah said. Tom's lip trembled. She said morning. Lillian untied her bonnet. Her hair had loosened during the ride and a strand stuck to her cheek. "Breakfast is not owned by the clock. Mr. Ashford, I use your stove." Caleb stood in the doorway as though unsure whether to enter his own house. "It's your kitchen now, if you stay." The words, "if you stay," hung in the room. Lillian set her bonnet on a peg. "Then I will need water, wood, and a clean cloth." All 4 boys moved at once, colliding in their eagerness and distrust. Micah went for the water bucket. Eli ran outside for kindling. Jonas took a cloth from a drawer, sniffed it, and made a face. Tom stayed beside Lillian. Still clutching his cup, Caleb stepped in. "You don't have to start tonight." Lillian turned to him. "Yes, I do." Their eyes held. His were gray, not cold exactly, but tired past ordinary warmth. He nodded and went outside. She worked without flourish. She cleaned the stove mouth, coaxed kindling into flame, sliced salt pork thin, mixed cornmeal with water and a pinch of flour, and set coffee to boil. The kitchen changed by degrees. First smoke, then heat, then the smell of pork curling in the pan. The boys grew still in a way that hurt to see. Hunger made them reverent. Jonas stood close enough to the stove that Lillian touched his shoulder. "Careful," he flinched. She withdrew her hand. "I only meant the grease my spit." He nodded but did not look at her. Caleb came back with an armload of wood and stopped just inside the door. The lamplight laid gold across the rough table. The boys' faces, Lillian's sleeves, rolled to the elbow. For a moment he seemed not to recognize his own kitchen. "Plates," she said. He moved to the shelf. "No," she added gently, "clean ones. There aren't any." "Then we wash," Micah snorted. But when she glanced at him, he picked up the basin without complaint. They ate corn cakes and salt pork at a table that had forgotten what it meant to hold enough. Lillian cut every piece small for Tom and poured weak coffee for Caleb, milkless and bitter. She did not sit until each child had food before him. When she finally took the crate, Caleb noticed. "You can have the chair," he said. "I can sit on a crate for one meal. It might be more than one." She met his gaze. "Then perhaps the crate will learn my shape?" Ali's mouth twitched. It was almost a smile. Quickly hidden behind his cup, the breakfast that was not breakfast settled over them like a strange mercy. Tom ate until his eyelids drooped. Jonas slipped crumbs into his pocket. Micah watched Lillian's hands as if measuring whether they were soft hands that would leave or working hands that might stay. Eli licked grease from his tongue and said, "Ma used to burn corn cakes The room went still. Caleb set down his fork. Eli stared at his plate, color rising in his face. "I didn't mean no harm," Lillian said. She wanted to ask about the woman who had burned corn cakes in his kitchen. She did not. Grief sat at the table already. It did not need to be called by name. After supper, Caleb showed Lillian the small room off the kitchen. It had a narrow cot, a wooden washstand, one shelf, and a window facing the cottonwoods. There was dust on the sill and a folded quilt at the foot of the bed. A woman's blue shawl hung on a nail behind the door, faded at the edges. "My sister used this room," he said. Before she passed, Lillian touched the quilt. "And the marriage." Caleb looked at the floorboards. "Preacher comes through Sunday. That is in 3 days. I.S. You wrote as though it were settled." "I wrote what I hoped would be true." There was no smoothness in him, no practiced charm. Just a man standing in a dim room with 4 sons breathing down the hall, and desperation, pressed so close, it had become part of his posture. "Do you want a wife, Mr. Ashford?" Lillian asked. "Or a hired woman, no wages, need be paid because vows are cheaper?" He flinched as though she had struck him. "I deserve that," he said. "I asked because I need to know." He removed his hat. In the lamplight, she saw the tired hollow beneath his eyes. "I need help. I need respectability before the county decides my boys would be better split among kin and charity. I need a woman in this house because folks forgive a widower's grief for a season, then call it neglect when the biscuits run out. And you?" He looked at her then. "I don't know what I need." That answer, plain and poor, softened something she had not meant to soften. "I will stay until Sunday," Lillian said. "I will work. I will observe. You will not speak of vows as if I owe them, because I rode a train. If we marry, we will make boundaries clear." His brow furrowed. "Boundaries. My room remains mine. Your room remains yours. The children will not be made to call me anything they do not choose. I will handle household accounts if I am expected to feed 6 mouths. I will not be shamed in town for spending flour money on flour." Caleb's mouth moved. "Almost not. Anything else?" "Yes. No lying to me about hunger." He looked away. She expected a defense. Instead he said, "All right." That night, Lillian unpacked by lamplight. From her trunk she took her mother's silver comb, 2 books, a small Bible with pressed violets between the pages, and a folded photograph of a house in Albany where she had not been wanted. At the bottom, wrapped in muslin, was a white apron embroidered with tiny, blue flowers. Her aunt had given it to her years before affection became ration. She held it a moment, then tied it over her black dress. From the other side of the wall came boys whispering. "Shall leave," Micah said. "She made pork," Eli answered. "Pork don't mean staying." She looked at Pa like Mrs. Bell does, Jonas murmured. "No," Tom said sleepily. She looked at my cup. Lillian sat on the cot, hands folded around the silver comb, and did not cry. Not because she did not want to, but because the walls were thin, and children listened for weakness in a house where adults had disappeared. Morning came red and dry. Before sunrise, Lillian heard Caleb moving outside, then the pump handle groaning, then a horse blowing in the yard. She rose, braided her hair, and found Tom asleep on the kitchen floor beside the coal stove, his tin cup under one hand like a toy. She crouched beside him. "Tom." His eyes opened wide with the instant fear of a child accustomed to waking in uncertainty. "You did not do wrong," she whispered. "You came looking for breakfast," he nodded. "Then let us make it." He watched while she stirred flour, water, salt, and yesterday's pork drippings into dough. The flour sack was low, too low. She measured carefully and scraped every bit from the bowl with her fingers. Tom stood on a crate and helped pat dough flat with both hands, his small palms left dents. Caleb entered as she set biscuits in the Dutch oven. "You're up early," he said. "So are hungry boys." Micah came in carrying kindling. He saw Tom at the table with flour on his nose. "He's pestering you. He is assisting me." Tom straightened proudly. The other boys drifted in by smell. Jonas coughed, a dry rattle that made Lillian look up. His cheeks were faintly flushed. Eli came barefoot, shirt half-buttoned, hair wild, already suspicious of the day. Micah had changed into work clothes patched at both knees. Lillian placed food before them and noticed how each child ate. Micah waited until his brothers began, then took the smallest biscuit. Jonas broke his in half and saved one piece. Eli ate fast, watching Caleb as if expecting the plate to be taken. Tom hummed around every bite. When Caleb reached for a biscuit, Lillian pushed the largest toward him. He shook his head. Boys need it. They need to see their father eat too. The room changed. Micah looked down. Caleb took the biscuit. After breakfast, Lillian asked for the account book. Caleb resisted for nearly an hour, first claiming it was in the barn, then that he kept figures in his head. She followed him through chores with quiet patience until he finally pulled a worn ledger from a tack box beneath a coil of rope. The pages told the story he had not. There was debt at Bell's Mercantile, debt at the feed mill, a note due to the bank in 6 weeks, 2 calves sold cheap to pay for medicine, a line marked coffin, another marked train fare deposit, and beside it her own name written in Caleb's square hand. Lillian touched that line. "You borrowed to bring me here. I sold a saddle." "That is not what I asked." His jaw tightened. "Yes. Why?" He leaned against the barn post. "Because Micah stopped speaking in school after Mrs. Dunleavy asked. When he last had a clean shirt. Because Jonas had fever, and I didn't know until he fell off the milking stool. Because Eli stole biscuits from Bell's and took the whipping without telling me I'd done it for Tom. Because Tom asked if dead mothers could send bread from heaven." A horse shifted in the stall. Outside, the wind dragged dust along the yard. Caleb's voice lowered. "Because I can mend fence and break horses and sleep in a chair beside a sickbed, but I cannot be 2 people. I wrote that letter because I was losing them." Lillian closed the ledger. "Then we begin with the truth." He gave a dry laugh. "Truth won't pay Bell. No, but lies spend more." For the next 3 days, the ranch became a place of small reckonings. Lillian scrubbed shelves, counted beans, mended 2 shirts, washed bedding, and made coffee weaker than Caleb liked because beans cost money. She found a sack of dried peaches hidden behind the flour barrel, forgotten and hard as stones, and soaked them for supper. She made broth from a chicken too old to fry and stretched it with dumplings. She sent Micah to repair the henhouse latch instead of riding fence because eggs mattered now. He argued. She handed him nails. "You talk like you own us," he said. "No," she replied. "I talk like I expect you to survive." He stared at her, then took the nails. Jonas' cough worsened by evening. Lillian boiled water with sage and made him breathe steam beneath a towel while Tom sat nearby, holding Ben's ear for comfort. Jonas tried not to cough because each fit embarrassed him. "My lungs ain't weak," he said. "I did not accuse them. Mrs. Bell said I got my moss chest." Lillian wrung out a cloth. "Mrs. Bell sells onions and gossip. She is not the Lord." Jonas gave a surprised laugh, which turned into a cough. Caleb, standing in the doorway, looked at Lillian as if she had done something braver than speak. Eli tested her hardest. He hid her sewing scissors in the flour bin, put a dead beetle beneath her pillow, and once told Tom she would vanish if anybody liked her too much. Lillian found Tom crying behind the woodpile, and Eli standing nearby with both fists clenched. She did not scold him in front of Tom. She waited until the younger boy had gone inside with a biscuit. Then she said, "You are afraid I will leave." Eli kicked at dust. "Don't care. You care so fiercely it bites everything near you." His face flushed. "You don't know anything. I know leaving." He looked up then. She held out the sewing scissors he had hidden. "And I know things lost on purpose sometimes want to be found." His chin trembled once before he hardened it. "Are you marrying Pa?" "I have not decided." "Then don't touch Miss Blue Shawl." "I won't." "And don't sit in her chair." "Which one?" He pointed through the kitchen window to the chair closest to the stove. "I will use the crate," Lillian said. He searched her face for mockery and found none. After that, he stopped hiding sharp things. On Sunday morning, the preacher arrived in a buggy that squeaked worse than the barn door. Reverend Tull was a round man with kind eyes and dust on his cuffs. Caleb shaved at the pump until his jaw looked raw. The boys wore clean shirts still damp from washing. Lillian put on her black dress, her mother's silver comb, and the blue flowered apron, because she could not afford a wedding gown and did not wish to pretend otherwise. The ceremony took place in the front room. 6 people stood beneath a roof that popped in the heat. The blue shawl remained on its nail. Lillian noticed Caleb's eyes go to it once. When Reverend Tull asked whether she took Caleb Ashford as her lawful husband, Lillian felt the room waiting. Not only Caleb, the boys, the dead, the town beyond the windows, the letter, the train, every road that had narrowed behind her. "I do," she said. Caleb's voice came rougher. "I do." No one cheered. Tom asked if vows meant biscuits forever. Reverend Tull smiled and said vows meant trying before God. Eli muttered that trying was not biscuits. Lillian went to the kitchen and made both. Marriage did not soften Caleb all at once. It put a line around the house and made everyone stare at it. For the first week he knocked before entering the kitchen if Lillian was alone. He slept in the small room off the back porch and gave her his larger room without discussing it. She found out only after seeing his blanket folded beside the boot bench at dawn. "You cannot sleep in a porch room through winter," she told him. "It's July. Winter still exists in July." He looked at her, then away. "Didn't want you thinking I expected." "I know what you expected. Work, order, and respectability." His mouth tightened. "That and all." She waited, but he did not finish. The marriage was spoken of in town within 2 days. By the time Lillian went to Bell's Mercantile with Micah and a list written in careful pencil, Mrs. Bell had already arranged her face into sympathy sharp enough to cut cloth. "Mrs. Ashford," she said, with too much sweetness, "how does the ranch suit you? It needs lime for the privy, lamp wicks, and fair prices." Micah stared at the counter to hide a grin. Mrs. Bell's smile thinned. "I hope Caleb told you the account is not open for luxuries. Children's soap is not luxury. Some would say a man ought not send east for a wife when he cannot pay for coffee." Lillian felt Micah stiffen beside her. She placed both hands on the counter. Her gloves were mended at one fingertip. She did not hide it. Some would say a town ought not watch 4 boys go hungry and then gossip over how their father failed to starve prettily. Mrs. Bell flushed. A man near the Cracker Barrel chuckled, then coughed when Mrs. Bell glared. Lillian continued, "I will pay what is owed in order. I will know every figure before I pay it, and if you speak of my husband's poverty in front of his son again, I will take my business to a freight wagon and wait 3 weeks for soap." Micah looked at her then. Really looked. Outside, he took the package of lamp wicks from her. "You didn't have to say husband. I did marry him. Still." They walked toward the wagon. A hot wind lifted the edge of her bonnet. "My mother used to defend Pa," Micah said. Lillian kept her eyes on the horses. "Then is fortunate twice," Micah swallowed. She weren't afraid of Belle either. "Wise woman." He said nothing more. But when she climbed into the wagon, he offered his hand. At home, Caleb heard about the store before the dust had settled on the wheels. In a town that small, news traveled faster than weather. He found Lillian at the clothesline, pinning shirts in the hard white sun. "You defended me," he said. "I defended Micah." He said, "You called me your husband." "You are." His face did something she could not read. "Belle can make things difficult," he said. "She already has. You shouldn't have to fight my debts. No, I should not. But I did not marry only your clean ledger, Caleb. It was the first time she had spoken his given name. The sound changed the air between them. A shirt snapped on the line. Somewhere near the barn, Eli shouted at a hen. Caleb looked down at her hands, reddened from washwater. Lillian, she waited. He shook his head, as if the rest of the sentence had ridden too far ahead of him. I'll fix the north fence today. It was not romance. It was not even tanks. But that evening, when she came in from gathering eggs, the stove had already been lit and the coffee pot set warm at the back where it would not boil bitter. A month passed in tasks that did not feel like transformation until Lillian looked back and saw the house had changed. Curtains made from old flour sacks hung in the kitchen window, washed white and trimmed with thread pulled from a torn petticoat. Beans soaked overnight instead of being forgotten until supper. The boys' shirts no longer smelled of barn straw. The crate remained at the table, but Caleb had sanded its rough edge so it would not snag her skirt. Tom stopped sleeping on the kitchen floor. At first he moved to the doorway of Lillian's room, then to the hall, then finally back to the bed he shared with Eli. Each morning he brought his tin cup to the table and set it upside down, a sign he had learned from Lillian that meant it was waiting to be filled, not begging. Jonah's cough eased with steam, rest, and broth. He began keeping small treasures in a cigar box under his bed. A blue button Lillian sewed back on twice, a feather, half a pencil, and one biscuit wrapped in cloth that grew hard as a stone before she convinced him food was allowed to be eaten. Today, Eli remained sharp but aimed less of it at people. He repaired the chicken latch better than Micah had, then pretended not to care when Caleb praised him. One evening he left Lillian's scissors on the sewing table instead of hiding them. Another day he placed the blue shawl carefully over the back of the forbidden chair, not for Lillian to use, but because dust had gathered on it. Micah took longest. He worked like a man and resented being tanked like a boy. He was 14, with wrists too thin and pride too large. Lillian found him one night in the barn, sitting beside a lantern with the account book open. You read figures upside down? She asked from the door. He startled, then scowled. I can read them straight. I did not say you couldn't. He looked at the ledger. Bank notes due in September. Yes, we won't pay it. We might, with hens and wheat coffee. With hens, wheat coffee, 2 calves brought to good weight, fewer store purchases, and your father taking the Porter horse job, if Mr. Porter still offers. Micah frowned. Pa said no to that. Why? Porter's wife said our house was unfit after Aunt Sarah died. Said Tom had dirt in his ears. Lillian came inside and sat on an overturned bucket. Did Tom? Micah blinked. What? Have dirt in his ears? I guess. Then Mrs. Porter was rude, not entirely false. He almost smiled, then remembered himself. Pa want work for folks who's shameless. That is pride. Pride's all some people got. No, Lillian said gently. Sometimes pride is what people hold when they think dignity has been taken. They are not the same thing. Micah stared at the ledger until the numbers blurred in the lamplight. You talk like books, he said. I was raised among them. You miss it? The question slipped out before he could pull it back. Lillian thought of Albany rain on slate roofs, of shelves lined with books, of her aunt's sewing basket, of doors closing softly in rooms where she was no longer wanted. Yes, she said, and no, that ain't an answer. It is the truest one. Micah nodded, as if he understood more than she had said. After that, he let her teach him bookkeeping in the evenings. Not every evening. Not with gratitude, but he came. Caleb watched these changes with the caution of a man who had once reached for something and found ashes. He thanked Lillian for meals. He brought water without being asked. He gave her money from the sale of a bridal repair job and did not question how she divided it. But he did not sit close. he did not touch, except by accident. He wore restraint like a second shirt. Then came the night of the dust storm. It rose from the southwest near sundown, a brown wall swallowing the last light. The hens went frantic. Horses stamped. Caleb and Micah ran to secure the barn. Eli and Jonas dragged Wash from the line, while Lillian took Tom inside and stuffed cloth along the window cracks. The wind hit so hard the house groaned. By full dark, dust hissed through every seam. The lamp flame shuddered. Tom cried because the sound reminded him of the night his mother died, though he did not say it in those words. He said, "Is the roof leaving too?" Lillian pulled him into her lap. "Not tonight." Eli crouched under the table with Ben. Jonas coughed into a cloth. Micah tried to stand near the door like Caleb would, but fear had whitened his mouth. Caleb came in last, hat gone, hair full of grit, blood running from a cut near his temple. Lillian rose so quickly Tom protested. "Sit," she ordered. "It's nothing." "Sit, Caleb." He sat. She cleaned the cut with boiled water while wind battered the walls. His hair was damp with sweat beneath the dust. Up close, she saw silver at his temples, though he could not have been more than 37. The scar on his wrist crossed another older scar, one hidden beneath his cuff. "Your hand," she said. He looked at it as if surprised to own one. "Rope burn? Years ago." "You say that about every wound." "Most wounds are years ago." She pressed the cloth to his temple. He caught her wrist, not hard, only to still the sting. For a moment, neither moved. The lamp threw their shadows together on the wall. Tom sniffed behind them. "Pa, don't bleed on breakfast." Caleb gave a short, quiet laugh. Lillian felt it through the hands still around her wrist. "I'll try not to," he said. The storm trapped them together until morning. After the boys slept in a heap near the stove, Lillian and Caleb sat at the table with cold coffee between them. Dust lay over everything in a fine red skin. Eli said not to touch the blue shawl, Lillian said. Caleb looked toward the chair. "It was Ruth's, my wife." "I know. She used to wear it in winter," said Arizona. Cold was sneaky. His tongue moved over the handle of his cup. A fever took her after Tom was born. Not quick, not gentle. She made me promise the boys would stay together. "And your sister." Sarah kept us from breaking. Then she broke. The simple cruelty of it sat between them. Caleb reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. He unfolded it carefully. Inside lay a brass thimble, dented on one side. "Ruth's," he said. Tom swallowed at once. She near tore the house apart before finding it in his diaper 2 days later. Despite herself, Lillian smiled. Caleb did too, faintly. Then the smile faded. I thought if I kept her things where they were, it meant I remembered right. Then the house went to ruin around them. Lillian looked at the thimble. Grief is not housekeeping, no, but children live in the house grief neglects. His eyes closed briefly. I know. She wished she had not spoken so sharply. Then he opened his eyes, and there was no anger there, only the weary relief of a man hearing truth without scorn. "My mother had a silver comb," Lillian said. "When she died, my aunt kept it wrapped in tissue for me. I used to think having it meant I still belonged somewhere. Then my uncle remarried, and belonging became something served at table only when guests watched." Caleb's gaze lifted. "They were not cruel in ways anyone could accuse," she continued. "No bruises, no locked doors, just fewer places set, fewer invitations. My trunk moved from the front room to the sewing room, then to the room above the pantry. When your letter came, my uncle called it Providence. Was it?" She looked toward the sleeping boys, Tom's foot resting across Elias' knee. Jonas curled around Ben. Micah with one hand still near the rifle he had brought inside during the storm. "I don't know yet." Caleb refolded the thimble. His voice dropped. "I'm glad you came. It was not enough to be love. It was too much to be nothing." In September, the banknote came due. Mr. Granger from the Marigold Bank arrived in a polished buggy with brass fittings. bright enough to shame every dent in the Ashford wagon. He wore a gray suit despite the heat and carried a leather folder beneath one arm. Mrs. Bell's nephew rode with him, pretending he was there by chance. Lillian saw them from the kitchen window and wiped flour from her hands. Caleb was in the corral with Micah, working a skittish bay mare. Mr. Porter had finally sent after Caleb swallowed pride and took the job. The mare's training money would help, but not enough. Mr. Granger removed his hat when Lillian stepped onto the porch. "Mrs. Ashford, I require a word with your husband. He is occupied with a horse that does not respect banking hours." Granger's mouth tightened. "This is not a social call. I did not put on tea." Behind her, Eli whispered. "Good." Lillian turned slightly. Inside, he vanished. Caleb came from the corral, dust on his sleeves. Micah followed, leading the mare. The boys gathered where they could hear without being told they were listening. Tom held Lillian's skirt. Granger opened his folder. "Ashford, the note stands unpaid. I have half." The agreement was not half, the remainder in 30 days. "The bank is not a church pantry." Lillian felt Caleb go still beside her. He did not look at the children. That was how she knew fear had entered him. Granger glanced toward the house. "There is interest from the Harlan outfit in this parcel, especially the creek access. If you cannot meet terms, sale might be the cleanest course." "This land isn't for sale," Caleb said. "All land is for sale when death says so." Micah stepped forward. "You can't take our house." Caleb's hand came down on his shoulder. "Quiet." But Micah shook him off. "No, you can't." Granger's eyes cooled. "A boy ought to learn when men are speaking." Lillian moved before she thought. She stepped down from the porch and stood between Micah and the banker. "A man ought to know when a child is defending his bed." Granger looked at her as if wives were furniture that had addressed him. "Mrs. Ashford, I sympathize with your domestic attachment, but figures do not soften for sentiment." "No," she said. "They soften for collateral, labor, and repayment." She went inside and returned with the account book, 3 folded receipts, and a cloth purse. Her hands did not tremble until she felt Caleb looking at the purse and knew he recognized it as her last Eastern money. "No," he said quietly. She ignored him. "We can pay half today. Mr. Porter's horse training fee is due upon delivery in 9 days. Mrs. Bell owes me $1.40 for mending flour sacks, though she hoped to call it store credit. We have 6 hens laying, 2 calves to sell after weight gain, and I will take laundry from the railroad camp if delivered weekly. We require an extension of 45 days. Granger gave a thin smile. "Laundry will not save a ranch, perhaps not, but documented payment might discourage a bank from appearing eager to dispossess 4 minor children for creek access, desired by the Harlan outfit." The banker's eyes sharpened. Caleb looked at her then, fully. Lillian held out the receipts. "Would you prefer I discuss that appearance with Reverend Tull and Sheriff Maddox before Sunday service? Or shall we write the extension plainly now?" The yard was quiet, except for the mare snorting in Micah's hand. Granger's nephew shifted in his saddle. At last, Granger closed his folder. 30 days? 45, Lillian said. 30. She looked at Caleb. He met her eyes. Something passed there, not permission, not dependence, partnership perhaps, in its first rough shape. 40, Caleb said. "And you'll write that Harlan approached before default." Granger's jaw worked. 40 days. Lillian extended her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Granger." He did not want to take it. He did. After he left, Caleb turned to Lillian. "Your purse, it was mine. Yes, I know what I did. You should have kept it, in case you need to leave." The words struck harder than she expected. Tom, sensing trouble without understanding it, pressed closer against her leg. "Yes, that what you think I am saving for?" Lillian asked. Caleb's face changed. "No, I meant." "You meant I should keep escape money because this marriage might still become something to escape. I meant I don't want you trapped. She laughed once, softly and without humor. A woman might be trapped by being unwanted too, Caleb. Do not congratulate yourself too quickly for leaving the door open if you never ask her to stay. He took a step back. The boys watched. Lillian regretted the audience, but not the truth. She picked up her skirt and went inside. That evening she packed her trunk. Not everything. Not in the dramatic way of a woman making a scene. She folded 2 blouses, her mother's Bible, the silver comb, and the black dress she had arrived in. She left the blue flowered apron hanging by the stove. Her heart felt foolish for that, as if cloth could speak better than she could. Outside, voices moved low. Caleb and Micah arguing in the barn. Eli snapping at Jonas. Tom crying because he had found the trunk open. Lillian sat on the cot and pressed both hands over her face. She had not meant to love the sound of the pump in the morning, or the way Caleb left the coffee pot warm, or Tom's cup upside down at breakfast, or Micah's careful numbers, or Eli's fierce little offers of repaired things, or Jonas' biscuit box now filled with buttons instead of emergency bread. She had not meant to become necessary because necessary could still be temporary. A knock came at the doorframe. "Come in," she said, expecting Tom. Caleb stood there with his hat in his hands. His eyes went to the trunk. Pain crossed his face and was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "I won't stop you," he said. Lillian's throat tightened. "I know, that was never." He looked down at the hat brim bending beneath his grip. "I thought leaving you a way out was kindness. It can be, but not if I use it so I never have to ask what I want." The room seemed very small. Caleb stepped inside but kept distance between them. "I was wrong." She looked at him. He swallowed. Stay, one word. No speech, no promise he could not yet understand. Just stay. Spoken by a man who has spent years bracing for every love thing to be taken and was choosing, at last, to reach. Lillian's eyes burned. "Why?" His answer came rough. "Because when you're not in this house, it feels like it's holding its breath. Because my boys look toward the kitchen before they look toward the door now. Because I hear you moving in the morning, and remember the day can be met instead of endured. Because I don't just need you here." He stopped, jaw tight. She stood slowly. "What do you want, Caleb?" He looked at her then. "You," he said, "not as debt, not as help, not as a woman cornered by my troubles. I want you here because you choose us, and I want to be worthy of that choosing." Lillian looked at the trunk, at the apron beyond him, at the small room that no longer felt borrowed. "I am still angry," she whispered. "I know. I am afraid. So am I." That is not very reassuring. His mouth lifted faintly. No, from the hall came a sniffle. Tom was listening. Of course he was. Then Eli whispered, "Move. I can't hear." Caleb closed his eyes. Lillian gave a laugh that broke halfway through. She crossed to the trunk and removed the Bible, the comb, and both blouses. Then she shut it. In the hallway, 4 boys scattered badly, pretending they had been nowhere near the door. Life did not become easy after that. It became honest, which was harder but cleaner. Lillian took laundry from the railroad camp twice weekly. The first bundle arrived with shirts so stiff with sweat and coal dust, she stood over the washtub until her back ached and her fingers wrinkled pale. Caleb tried to refuse the work after seeing her hands split. She held them out. These hands bought lamp oil. He took them carefully, as though they were injured birds, and rubbed salve into the cracks without a word. His thumbs were warm. Neither of them looked up until Tom wandered in and asked if hand-holding was another kind of medicine. "Yes," Caleb said, surprising them both. Tom considered this and held Ben's paw for the rest of the evening. Micah delivered clean laundry to the camp and returned with payment. His face flushed with pride he tried to hide. Jonas learned to gather eggs without dropping more than one a week. Eli trapped a raccoon that had been stealing corn, then cried furiously when Caleb said they had to kill it. Caleb released it 2 miles away instead. He told no one Lillian had asked him to let mercy cost a little trouble. The Porter mare sold well after Caleb gentled her. Mr. Porter paid in cash and apology both, though the apology was mostly directed toward the ground. Lillian accepted the money. Caleb accepted the apology because Micah was watching. Then, just when the ledger began to look less like a sentence, rain came wrong. It started as a blessing, dark clouds over the dry hills, the smell of creosote rising rich and sharp-tongued. The boys ran laughing into the yard until Lillian called them back before lightning. Rain drummed on the roof, filled barrels, washed dust from leaves, and turned the yard to red mud. Caleb stood on the porch with his shoulder near Lillian's, both of them watching water run where the creek bed had been empty. "We needed this," she said. He nodded. "Not too much." By midnight, the creek was no longer a creek. It was a brown, violent thing carrying branches, stones, and half the upstream world. The north fence broke first. Caleb heard it even through rain. He grabbed his coat. "Stay inside," he told the boys. Micah reached for his boots. "I'm coming." "No, the calves." I said no. But the calves were in the low pen near the cottonwoods, and everybody knew it. If the water rose another foot, they would drown. Money mattered, but life mattered first. And on a ranch, the two were cruelly tangled. Caleb took a lantern and rope. Lillian followed him to the porch. "You cannot go alone." "I can move faster alone." "You can die faster alone too." His face hardened. "Lillian." She turned and called, "Micah, Boots, Eli, keep Tom away from the door. Jonas, bring every dry blanket to the kitchen." Caleb stared at her. "You're ordering my sons into a flood?" "I am ordering your oldest to hold a lantern from high ground so you can see where not to die." Micah appeared pale but ready. Pale but ready. Caleb looked at Lillian through sheets of rain. For one breath, pride fought fear. Then he handed Micah the spare lantern. "High ground only," he said. "You disobey, I'll tan you after surviving." Micah nodded. The storm tore sound apart. Lillian could barely see beyond the swinging lanterns. Caleb waded into water near the pen with a rope tied around his waist, the other end secured to a cottonwood. Micah stood uphill, lantern raised, shouting when debris rushed by. Lillian moved along the bank, skirts soaked heavy, trying to keep the calves from bolting toward deeper water as Caleb cut the gate loose. One calf stumbled. Water hit his side and rolled it. Caleb lunged, grabbed the rope halter, and went down to one knee. The current dragged him. Lillian screamed his name, but the rain swallowed it. Micah dropped the lantern and started forward. "Stay!" Lillian shouted. She seized the cottonwood rope with both hands and pulled. Mud sucked at her boots. The rope burned her palms. Caleb got 1 foot under him, then slipped again. Lillian wrapped the rope around her waist and leaned back with everything she had. "Get up," she cried. "Caleb, get up." He did. Between them somehow, the calf lurched into shallower ground. Micah caught its halter and dragged it uphill, sobbing angry curses he would later deny. Caleb freed the second calf easier, though by then his face was gray with cold and effort. When they stumbled back into the kitchen, water poured from their clothes. Tom wailed at the sight of Caleb's torn sleeve. Jonas thrust blankets at everyone with shaking hands. Eli stood rigid by the stove, feeding wood into it, as if fire alone could hold the world together. Caleb's left hand was bleeding badly, rope burn torn open across old scars. Lillian took one look and went for the bandage box. He tried to speak. "You shouldn't have." "Do not," she said. The force in her voice silenced him. She cleaned the wound while the storm raged on. Her own palms were raw. When he saw, his face broke in a way no flood had managed. "Lillian." "No," she said, softer now. "Let me be angry that you nearly died. I'm alive. I am still angry." His good hand covered hers. "All right, Micah stood near the stove, dripping onto the floor. She saved you? Caleb looked at his son. Yes. Micah's mouth trembled. You would drown alone? Yes. That's stupid. A startled silence followed. Eli looked ready to laugh or hide. Jonas froze with blankets in his arms. Tom sniffed loudly. Caleb nodded once. Yes. Micah wiped his face with a wet sleeve. Don't do it again. Caleb looked at Lillian, then at all four boys. I want. The flood took part of the fence and one chicken coop wall, but not the calves. It left Ma up to the porch step and branches lodged against the cottonwoods. It also left behind a truth no one could put back where it had been. Lillian had tied herself to the rope. Caleb had let himself be pulled home. The 40 days ended with a clear sky and a wagon ride to town. Lillian wore her black dress, cleaned and pressed, with a blue flowered apron folded in her basket for mending work later. Caleb wore his best shirt. Micah carried the account book. Jonas held the purse with both hands, solemn as a banker. Eli had combed his hair badly but earnestly. Tom brought his tin cup, though Lillian told him no one needed a cup at the bank. I might, he said. For what? If they say no, I can hit 'em. Caleb coughed into his fist. Lillian turned her face so Tom would not see her smile. At the bank, Mr. Granger looked surprised to see all of them. Surprise became displeasure when Caleb placed money on the desk. Not all in coins, some in notes, some in a signed promise from Mr. Porter for additional horse work, some in receipts proving steady income. Enough to satisfy the extension and renew terms without forfeiture. Granger counted twice. You have been busy, he said. My wife keeps accounts, Caleb replied. Lillian glanced at him. He had said it simply, but in front of Granger, in front of the boys, it landed like a public vow. Granger signed the papers. The bank expects continued discipline, and we expect written copies, Lillian said. Micah slid the inkstand closer. Outside, Mrs. Bell stood across the street watching from her store awning. Beside her, Sheriff Maddox leaned against a post. Mr. Porter tipped his hat. Reverend Toll smiled openly. Caleb paused at the wagon. Wait here. He crossed the street to Mrs. Bell. Lillian could not hear the first words. She saw Mrs. Bell's posture sharpen. She saw Caleb remove his hat. She saw him speak long enough that passers-by slowed. Then Mrs. Bell's face changed color. Eli whispered, fighting her? With words? Micah said. Tom looked disappointed. Caleb returned with his expression grim but settled. What did you say? Lillian asked. He helped her into the wagon. That my debts were mine. My children were not for public pity. And my wife would be treated with respect in that store, or I'd build shelves in the barn and sell goods myself. You would hate keeping store. I would. She looked at him, warmth rising in her chest. Thank you. He touched the edge of her glove, brief and careful. You defended my name before I deserved it. I can defend yours now that I know what it's worth. They rode home with flour, coffee, beans, 2 peppermint sticks divided into 4 sticky portions, and a small packet of flower seeds Lillian had not purchased. Caleb had. He handed them to her when the ranch came into sight. For the bare place by the porch, he said. She turned the packet over. Hollyhocks, bright, stubborn flowers that could stand heat if given a chance. They might not grow, she said. They might. That evening, they planted them together. Tom dropped seeds too close. Jonas covered them too deep. Eli made a little fence of sticks to protect the patch from chickens. Micah fetched water without being asked. Caleb knelt beside Lillian in the dirt, his injured hand clumsy but willing. Weeks moved into cooler evenings. The repaired fence stood straight along the north pasture. Curtains stirred in the kitchen window. The blue shawl no longer hung forgotten behind the door. One chilly morning, Eli carried it to Lillian and held it out with fierce embarrassment. You can use it, he said, if you don't spill coffee. Lillian took it as carefully as she would have taken a newborn. I will be careful. It was mess, I know. Shed want Tom warm. Lillian wrapped the shawl around Tom first. Eli nodded, satisfied, then ran outside before anyone could thank him. That night, after the boys slept, Lillian found Caleb on the porch. The sky was black velvet and stars. Coyotes called far off, their voices thin and lonely. She wore Ruth's shawl around her shoulders, not as a replacement, but as part of the house's long memory. Caleb looked at it, then at her. There was sadness in him, but not the drowning kind. She would write you, he said. I hope so. She would have argued with you. I expect I would have liked her too. He leaned on the porch rail. His hand had healed with a new scar crossing the old. I loved her, he said. I know. I thought that meant there was no honest way to love after. Lillian stood beside him, close enough that their sleeves touched. Love is not a chair only one person might sit in. He looked toward the dark yard where the hollyhock patch slept beneath its stick fence. You always talk like books. S.O. I've been told. He turned. I love you, Lillian Archer Ashford. The name moved through her slowly, not trapping, not erasing, joining. Her eyes filled. But she smiled. That was nearly a speech. I can shorten it. Please do. He took her hand, giving her time to pull away. She did not. Stay, he said again. This time, she answered without fear. I have. The first frost silvered the pasture in November. By then, the Ashford kitchen had become the kind of room people entered with shoulders lowered. Breakfast was still the heart of it. Not grand breakfast, corn cakes, beans, eggs when hens allowed. Coffee stretched but hot, sometimes apples fried in drippings when money and mercy aligned. But every morning, 6 places waited. The crate was gone. Caleb had built Lillian a chair from cedar scraps and sanded it smooth until no splinter remained. He set it beside his, not where Ruth's chair had been, but where morning light touched first. Tom no longer asked if breakfast was coming. He asked if he could pour water. His tin cup sat on a shelf, not hidden, not clutched. Sometimes he forgot it entirely. Jonas ate what was on his plate and saved buttons in his cigar box instead of bread. He still coughed in cold weather, and Lillian still put a warm cloth on his chest, but he no longer apologized for needing care. Eli became guardian of the hens, terror of raccoons, and secret protector of the hollyhocks, though they would not bloom until spring. He told Lillian one morning that her biscuits were not as good as his mother's burned ones, then added quickly that they were better for chewing. Micah grew an inch before Christmas and began writing figures clean enough that Caleb joked the bank might fear him one day. When Mrs. Bell asked whether he planned to leave for railroad work, he said, "Not yet. We're building something." He blushed after saying it, but did not take it back. Christmas came plain. Reverend Tull brought oranges from a church collection. Mrs. Bell sent a sack of sugar with no note. Sheriff Maddox left a ham on the porch and denied it under oath. Caleb carved small wooden horses for the boys. Lillian mended a quilt from old dresses, shirts, and one square of blue cloth from a torn edge of Ruth's shawl, placed where all the patterns met. On Christmas morning, snow dusted the distant hills, though none reached the yard. Caleb stood in the kitchen doorway, watching his sons eat orange slices as if they were treasure. Lillian poured coffee and set his cup near the stove to keep warm. He came behind her, not touching, just near. You remember the depot? She looked over her shoulder. I remember Tom asking if I brought breakfast. Tom, hearing his name, said, I was hungry. You were honest, Lillian said. Caleb took his cup. One breakfast changed everything. No, she said, watching Micah give half his orange to Jonas without being asked, Eli slipping a piece to Ben, Tom licking juice from his fingers with complete peace. Hunger told the truth. Breakfast only gave us a place to answer. Caleb's gaze rested on her face. And did we? He asked softly. She took his scarred hand beneath the cover of ordinary kitchen noise. "We are still answering." Spring came at last, bright and improbable. The hollyhocks by the porch pushed green through stubborn dirt, then climbed, then opened in pink and red and pale yellow cups that trembled in the morning breeze. The fence held. The hens multiplied. The banknote shrank. The kitchen curtains glowed white after washing. One evening, with supper finished and the boys sprawled in that loose-limbed piece children have only when they feel safe, Lillian stepped onto the porch. Caleb followed with 2 cups of coffee. The sun lowered behind the hills, turning the yard gold. Ben slept near the steps. From inside came Micah's voice teaching Jonas figures, Eli protesting that numbers were a punishment, and Tom singing nonsense to himself while stacking tin cups. Caleb handed Lillian a cup. "Mrs. Bell asked if you'd make pies for the church supper." "Did she?" "Said yours hold together better than Mrs. Porter's." "High praise." "She also said to tell you she was sorry." Lillian looked at him. "She said it badly," Caleb added. "But she said it." Lillian sipped her coffee. It was strong tonight, a small extravagance. Across the yard, a patched window reflected the last light. The house still leaned a little. The barn door still complained. Money still mattered. Winter would come again. Children would grow and grieve in new ways. Love would require breakfast tomorrow, and mending and patience and truth when pride wanted silence. But the table inside was clean. 6 chairs waited. A blue shawl lay over the back of Lillian's cedar chair. Her mother's silver comb rested on the shelf above the Bible. Caleb's hand, scarred and warm, found hers in the sunset. There are homes built with lumber, and there are homes built one morning at a time. Lillian Archer had come from the east to marry a stranger with 4 hungry sons, carrying a trunk, a guarded heart, and no promise of love. She found a house full of grief and made room for bread. And in that hard Arizona country, where dust remembered every footstep and wind tested every door, one breakfast became a beginning, and the beginning became a family.